The breaking point. The command center of the Arcadian flagship Eternal Victory hummed with familiar activity. First Admiral Thelox watched the tactical display with eyes that had witnessed 10,000 battles. The holographic projection showed the familiar dance of war. Arcadian vessels in perfect formation facing their ancient enemy, the Viridian Armada. Enemy fleet maintaining standard attack pattern. Admiral, reported his tactical officer. Their energy signatures indicate weapon charging at predicted levels. Thelox nodded without interest. Proceed with counter-pattern Sigma. Standard engagement protocols. For 800,000 years, the Arcadians and Viridians had waged this war across the stars. Both species had evolved technologies beyond comprehension, extending their lifespans, perfecting their weapons, and spreading across thousands of worlds. Yet neither could gain the decisive advantage. The battle unfolded exactly as predicted. Energy beams lanced between the massive warships. Shields flared and regenerated. Smaller vessels darted between the capital ships, following choreographed attack patterns refined over millennia. It was less a battle than a ritual, a perfectly balanced equation of destruction. "Sir," called a junior officer, "we're detecting an anomaly at coordinates 27 to 8394. Thelox frowned. "Viridian reinforcements." "No, sir. Unknown signature. The mass is significant, but the vessel is small." The anomaly resolved on the tactical display as a sleek vessel, minuscule compared to the titanic warships surrounding it. Its hull gleamed like polished obsidian with bands of iridescent material that seemed to shift and flow. A human vessel, Thelox realized with mild surprise. What are they doing in an active combat zone? The humans were relative newcomers to interstellar travel, having achieved faster-than-light capability only 50,000 years ago, a blink of an eye compared to the ancient civilizations. They had wisely maintained neutrality in the eternal conflict, focusing instead on quiet expansion and scientific advancement. "They're broadcasting on all frequencies." "Admiral, put it through." A human female appeared on the main view screen. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly, and her eyes reflected determination beyond her species' young age. "Arcadian and Viridian forces, this is Captain Elena Reyes of the Earth vessel Pathfinder. By authority of the United Nations of Earth, I order both fleets to cease hostilities immediately." A ripple of amusement passed through the command center. Thelox allowed himself a small smile. "The audacity of youth." "Human vessel," he responded. "This is First Admiral Thelox of the Arcadian Dominion. You have entered an active combat zone. While we respect your species' neutrality, you must withdraw immediately for your own safety." On a separate channel, he could see the Viridian High Commander Zora making a similar statement, her crystalline features betraying similar condescension. "We will not withdraw," the human captain stated firmly. 3 days ago, your conflict spilled into neutral territory. A human research outpost in the Proxima Centauri system was destroyed with all 5,000 personnel aboard." Thelox frowned. Collateral damage was inevitable in a war of this scale, but the humans had never protested before. "Regrettable, but irrelevant," Commander Zora interjected. "This war has raged for 800 millennia. The loss of one outpost from a minor species is inconsequential." Captain Ray's expression hardened. "You misunderstand. I'm not requesting permission or approval. I'm informing you that this ends today." Thelox exchanged a glance with his executive officer. The humans were known for their optimism and determination, but this bordered on delusion. "Captain Reyes," he said with forced patience, "your vessel, while impressive for your technological level, is a mote of dust compared to either of our fleets. Each of our civilizations has millions of warships across thousands of star systems. What could one human vessel possibly do? Allow me to demonstrate." The human captain nodded to someone off-screen. Thelox's sensor officer suddenly shouted, "Admiral!" Energy surged from the human vessel. Before Thelox could respond, a pulse of blue-white energy expanded from the Pathfinder in a perfect sphere. As it washed over the Arcadian and Viridian ships, Every weapon system went dead. Engines sputtered and failed. Even the artificial gravity flickered momentarily. What just happened? Thelox demanded. Unknown, Admiral, responded his chief engineer, panic in her voice. All quantum-based systems are offline. Weapons, shields, propulsion, everything. The human captain's face reappeared on screen. That was a targeted dimensional wave. It temporarily disrupted the quantum fields your technology relies on. Don't worry. It's temporary. Your systems will reset in approximately 10 minutes. Thelox stared in disbelief. Impossible. No civilization has mastered dimensional physics at that level. You're partially correct, Rise acknowledged. No civilization engaged in your war has mastered it. Humanity chose a different path. While you perfected the art of killing each other, we explored the fabric of reality itself. For the first time in centuries, Thelox felt genuine fear. What do you want? As I said, an end to this conflict. Both fleet commanders will transport to the Pathfinder immediately for peace negotiations. Zara's laughter came through the still-functioning communication systems. Even if you can temporarily disable our ships, you cannot force us to negotiate. Our war predates your entire species. I understand your skepticism, Rise replied calmly. Perhaps another demonstration is needed. A beam of coherent energy shot from the Pathfinder toward an uninhabited moon orbiting the system's gas giant. When it struck, the moon didn't explode or break apart. It simply vanished, leaving empty space where a celestial body had been moments before. Silence fell across both fleets' communication channels. The moon hasn't been destroyed, Captain Rice explained. It's been shifted to an adjacent dimension. We can return it. The beam fired again, and the moon reappeared exactly where it had been. Or we can make the shift permanent. Our technology can target specifically at the quantum level. We could shift individual ships, entire fleets, or even populated planets into other dimensions. Thelox sat heavily in his command chair. In 800,000 years of warfare, neither the Arcadians nor the Viridians had developed anything remotely similar. The implications were staggering. You would threaten genocide? He asked. No, Rise responded firmly. We're offering an alternative to genocide. Your war has claimed trillions of lives already. We're simply proving we have the technological advantage to enforce peace. Commander Zara's voice cut through the channel. This is a bluff. They have one ship. One is sufficient, Rise replied. But if you require further convincing. Another energy beam shot from the Pathfinder, this time striking a large asteroid in the system's outer belt. Instead of shifting it entirely, the beam seemed to partially phase it. The asteroid remained visible, but took on a ghostly, translucent quality. We can selectively phase matter between dimensions, Rise explained. This asteroid now exists simultaneously in our dimension and another. The effect on living beings would be unpleasant. Thelox closed his eyes briefly. The humans had achieved what both warring empires had sought for countless millennia. Absolute technological superiority. You have 30 minutes to agree to peace talks, Captain Rice stated. After that, we will begin selectively removing military assets from both sides until you comply. As the communication ended, Thelox stared at the small human vessel on his display. For the first time in memory, the choreographed battle had stopped completely. 800,000 years of continuous warfare, paused by a single ship. Admiral, his executive officer whispered, "What do we do?" Thelox watched as the systems on his flagship slowly came back online. "We negotiate," he said softly. "For the first time in our history, we have no choice." A new dawn. 50 minutes after the Pathfinder had entered the battlefield, First Admiral Thelox of the Arcadian Dominion and High Commander Zara of the Viridian Armada stood in the conference room of the human vessel. Despite commanding fleets that could devastate entire star systems, both leaders found themselves disarmed, physically and psychologically, by the technology that had transported them aboard. Captain Elena Reyes entered the room, flanked by 2 officers. She was younger than Thilox had expected, barely 200 years old by his estimation, a child compared to his 12,000 years of life. "Thank you for accepting our invitation," she said, her voice carrying none of the awe or deference most species showed to the ancient powers. "We had little choice," Commander Zora replied coldly, her crystalline skin refracting light across the room. "Your technology is unexpected." Dimensional physics wasn't the obvious path, Rise acknowledged, gesturing for them to sit. "Your civilizations focused on weapons that could destroy. We explored ways to manipulate the fabric of reality itself." Thilox studied the human captain. "You said Proxima Centauri was the breaking point. Why now? Your outposts have suffered collateral damage before." Raya's expression hardened. "Because it wasn't collateral damage. Our intelligence indicates it was deliberately targeted by a Viridian strike force." Zara's crystalline features remained impassive. "A preemptive measure. Your scientists were developing technology that could have upset the balance." "The balance?" Rise laughed bitterly. "You mean your meaningless, eternal stalemate. 800,000 years of war that neither side remembers the reason for." "We remember perfectly," Thilox stated firmly. "The Viridians violated the sacred boundary and harvested the forbidden worlds." "Lies," Zara hissed. "The Arcadians sabotaged our generation ships during the Great Migration, killing millions." A human officer stepped forward, activating a holographic display. "We've spent centuries studying your conflict. Your own historical records contradict each other. The earliest verifiable accounts from both sides offer completely different reasons for the war's beginning." "Because they lie," both leaders said simultaneously, then glared at each other. "Or because the truth was lost long ago," Rise suggested quietly. "Time corrupts memory, even for near-immortal species. What remains is ritual and hatred without purpose." Thilox frowned. "What could humans possibly understand about our conflict?" "Perhaps nothing," Rise conceded. "Or perhaps everything, precisely because we're outsiders. We see patterns you've become blind to." The hologram shifted to display battle formations from throughout history. As millennia passed in accelerated time, the patterns became increasingly formalized, predictable. "Your war stopped being about victory centuries ago," the human science officer explained. "It evolved into a ritualized conflict with acceptable casualties and minimal territorial changes." "When was the last time either side launched a full-scale offensive?" Neither leader answered. "You've been maintaining the war, not trying to win it," Rise continued. "It's become your civilization's purpose, your reason for existence." "You have no right to interfere," Zora protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "We have every right," Rise countered. "Your war now threatens species who never chose to be involved. Humanity won't stand by while ancient empires drag the galaxy into their endless conflict." She nodded to her officers, who activated another display showing a complex mathematical model. "Our projections indicate your war will expand beyond containment within 5,000 years. Neutral species will be forced to choose sides. The conflict will consume the entire galaxy within 50,000 years, with projected casualties in the quadrillions." Thilox stared at the simulation, disturbed by its implications. "You cannot know this." "We dedicated entire think tanks to studying your war," Rise replied. "It's not difficult to extrapolate. Your civilizations have reached technological plateaus. You advance just enough to maintain the stalemate." "What do you propose?" Zara asked, surprising both Thilox and the humans. "Peace," Rise said simply. "Not a temporary ceasefire, but permanent disarmament monitored by a coalition of neutral species, including humans." Thilox laughed bitterly. "Impossible. The war infrastructure is the foundation of both our economies, our societies." "Then rebuild them," Rise said, her voice softening. "You've had 800,000 years of destruction. Imagine what your brilliant minds could create if turned toward cooperation." Our peoples would never accept it, Zara stated. The hatred runs too deep. Reyes nodded to her science officer, who brought up new projections. We've modeled that too. There would be resistance, even civil wars within your empires. But within 500 years, new generations would emerge who've never known the conflict. Within 2,000 years, the war would become historical curiosity. And if we refuse? Thelox asked. The captain's expression remained neutral. Then humanity will enforce peace through technological superiority. Every ship that fires upon the enemy will be immediately shifted to a containment dimension. Eventually, you'll lack the military capability to continue fighting. You would need thousands of ships with your technology, Zara observed. We have one now, Reyes acknowledged. We'll have 10 within a year, 100 within 5 years. Our production capacity is modest compared to your empires, but sufficient. Thelox studied the human captain carefully. You're bluffing. Your ship's power requirements must be enormous. You couldn't possibly maintain dimensional shifts on the scale you're suggesting. For the first time, Reyes smiled. Our chief engineer would be happy to show you the Pathfinder's quantum singularity core. It produces more energy than your entire fleet combined, yet fits in a room smaller than this one. Silence fell over the conference room. Both ancient leaders recognized the paradigm had shifted irrevocably. A species they had dismissed as primitive had achieved what neither of their civilizations had managed in nearly 1,000,000 years. The terms of this peace, Thelox finally said. What exactly do you propose? Over the next several hours, the humans outlined their peace framework. Both empires would maintain sovereignty over their territories, but submit to weapons inspections. A demilitarized zone would be established along contested borders. Joint scientific and cultural exchanges would be mandatory. Most importantly, an oversight council comprised of neutral species would mediate disputes and enforce compliance. This is unprecedented, Zara said when they finished. No outside power has ever dictated terms to either of our civilizations. No outside power has ever had the means to enforce them, Reyes replied. But this isn't about domination. We're offering a path to something better than endless war. Thelox studied the terms displayed before him. Our military commanders will resist. Many have known nothing but war for thousands of years. Then retire them, Reyes suggested, or redirect their expertise to exploration, disaster response, or scientific advancement. Beings capable of leading complex military campaigns have skills valuable beyond the battlefield. As they continued to negotiate details, Thelox observed the humans with new appreciation. They lacked the ancient wisdom and refined civilization of the Arcadians, or the crystalline perfection and unified purpose of the Viridians, yet they possessed something both ancient species had lost: innovation born of necessity and hope untainted by millennia of hatred. After 6 hours of negotiations, preliminary agreements were reached. Thelox and Zara would return to their respective fleets with ceasefire orders. Formal peace talks would begin within 30 days on a neutral world, with human mediators. As they prepared to leave, Thelox addressed Captain Reyes directly. You've accomplished in a day what countless generations failed to achieve. But forcing peace isn't the same as building it. Reyes nodded soberly. We know. That's why this is only the beginning. Peace requires more courage than war, Admiral. It demands facing the unknown rather than clinging to familiar hatred. And if we falter? Zara asked. Then we'll be there, Reyes said, with our dimensional technology and our stubborn human optimism. We'll keep pushing until peace becomes more natural than conflict. When they returned to their flagships, something unprecedented happened. For the first time in 800,000 years, the great warships of both ancient empires powered down their weapon systems completely. The ritual dance of death that had continued uninterrupted for longer than human civilization had existed finally paused. Aboard the Pathfinder, Captain Reyes watched the massive fleets begin to separate on the tactical display. Her first officer approached, relief evident on his face. It worked, he said quietly. They're actually standing down. For now, Rise cautioned, this is just the first step on a very long road. Do you think they'll honor the agreement? Rise watched as the ancient warships slowly moved away from each other, breaking formations that had been maintained for millennia. They'll try to find loopholes. They'll test our resolve. Some will refuse to accept the new reality, she acknowledged. But we've given them something they haven't had in 800,000 years. What's that? Her officer asked. Ray smiled as the last of the warships disappeared into hyperspace, leaving only stars where an apocalyptic battle had raged just hours before. A chance to remember who they were before they became enemies, and sometimes that's enough to change everything.